Sure, I'm gonna answer live. I like GhostWheel a lot. I have been using guardrails instead of GhostWheel mostly because for a time GhostWheel got stopped supporting. The guy that developed GhostWheel, I think he took a break or something like that. So me and Tony K were trying to use GhostWheel back then, but there's just some subtle features that we like to get released, and the guy was not there. So guardrails was built to compensate to try to fix that. And now after a bunch of time, the guy just got back, I think a couple of weeks ago, and he's starting to work on FigueWheel as well. So now I'm not sure how the future is going. Me, I'm just staying with guardrails just because I end up doing that. I'm already accustomed to using it. So I'll be. So that's my experience. I mean, and if he, I'm not sure if that was the whole question, but in general, I really like the experience of having the immediate feedback, and the way that both guardrails and GhostWheel do that is more like it doesn't try to stop your software, right? It's more like a bunch of hints, and if you do something wrong, or maybe your spec is wrong, or maybe your implementation is wrong, it's just gonna keep it alerting you. And I find that very useful. It catches me a lot of errors before I have to deal with them in a more harder way. I hope that answered your question. If not, just send another message. Sure.
Oh, I just passed it on. I
Oh,
think Dan had a question.
oh yeah, I was going to ask to do that. Thanks. Yeah, then you can talk to us now.
You might have to unmute yourself. I think it mutes you
Yeah,
by default.
yeah, yeah. Then in case you are trying to make a question, you are still muted. Okay, you seem unmuted now, but I still can't hear you.
Maybe he's having mic problems.
Yeah, maybe.
Tech
Technical
problems were
issues.
inevitable. I can't believe it took this long.
Oh, it means I got the first. Yay! uh, yeah, then if you can check your mic settings, I think something something is probably going wrong.
Oh, he mentioned he's going to type it out.
Okay.
Okay. I guess one question while Dan types it out. Uh, you've mentioned you have a lot of experience with spec. How have you found working with spec not exactly matching the shape of the data? It's not like you're creating a map with just all the keys and values, kind of like you might with schema. Um, how have you found working with that experience?
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, right? And I think it's clear to everybody, especially given that Spec 2 is trying to fix that using the schema thing. And yes, it is a problem when you have something that is a collection or a reference. So what I personally end up doing is just using as keys. So for example, if I have an attribute that I'm gonna call user address, the spec for user address is just gonna be as keys. Or if it's addresses in the plural, then would be like as call off as keys. So because you can't be specific about, I prefer to just leave it loose in those situations. So I didn't use spec much to enforce on that. I saw that the most value is being really specking the more fine grained details. Make sense?
Yeah, thanks. And I think there's one up in the QA section.
Okay, cool. Let me read the question. Is in your talk? Oh, and sorry about that. I didn't read the previous one, and people asked me to read, so just fill that up. The previous question was about my experience with Ghost Wheel and playing with that. And the new question is, in your talk, you mentioned that instead of deleting, create a new function adding a number. Example, function 1, 2, 3. At which point does one say, okay, that's enough? And at that point, should a new library be created? And related that as a maintainer, does it add much burden to support FN 1, 2, and okay. Thanks for the question, Jose. Okay, sorry, I forgot to click your answer. Okay, so I guess to me the most burden to maintain, I think it's good to have that so you don't break stuff and people can upgrade on their own pace. And I don't think there's never a final number. It will really depend on case by case. In my experience with the Python readers, I could keep going and I had up to reader 3. And right now I'm actually redesigning Python from scratch, but not just for that reason, mostly for other reasons. It's like Python was born in a time and I just incorporated what OmNext was trying to do and how OmNext designed the EQL processing things. But after so much time doing it, and especially after the connect parts of Python, I think that connect part is something that needs to be much more on the core instead of being a plugin to the previous architecture that was more based on the reader sense. And oh, so I'm still answering that one. Okay. So yeah, I guess you should only create a new library if you feel that's like, yeah, the basic structures of these are not working, and it's the gain from changing this can like, because you're gonna put the price on your customers to do an upgrade. That's the thing, right? Every time you create a new library, you put that burden. It's like, no, now you have the migration process. So to me, it's about balancing like how much better it's getting and is it worth it? And if it is, I think it's good to create a new library. Otherwise, just keep as is. Okay, let me go to the next question. I hope I answer, Jose. And again, if not, if it's still need clarification, please send more. And I'm gonna answer another question that's been from Dimitri. Hi, I really enjoyed your talk and generally agree with other suggestions. One question I have is how you end up dealing with namespacing keys in cases where the data is defined outside the system. Do you find it's better to leave the unqualified and use UN to translate to internal model that's qualified? Uh, Great question. I think if you're dealing with data that comes from external services, and I actually have a fun story around that because the work that I did at Neobank for over a year, that's where I work mostly with Python, and I think where I get the most of my experience around dealing with a large number of names and long names. And what was funny about the architecture there is that although 90% of the servers were Clojure, and every database was using Datomic, so they had to use namespace keywords. Although that was the premise, because of the way that Nubank's microservice architecture was built on the beginning, they were not entirely sure about transit or EDN. So most of the things across services, they just strip out all the keywords, all the namespaces. So and the service that I was working on was about getting all this data together from these multiple services. And then our job was really get their get their data that comes on namespaced from the REST endpoints we hit, and then add namespaces back to them. So I think this is a good practice. If you are dealing with an external system that is not providing you namespace keywords, at the boundary side, you convert to namespace keywords so they are context free inside of your system. That's how I think about that. Thanks for the question.
In the chat, Max asked, I guess piggybacking on the spec question from earlier, what are your thoughts on spec 2? Are you using anything else in Pathom if not spec?
I have not been much on the loop for spec 2 right now, mostly because I use a lot of tools that still depend on spec 1. So I guess for that, I'm more on the safer people side. I'm waiting for spec 2 to be like, yeah, this is the stable API to start converting anything to it. So yeah, but the new pattern version is still going for with spec 1 and guardrails.
Makes sense. I haven't personally used Pathom, but do you use anything else in it other than spec? Like, do you guys support what is it, Mali or I forgot the name, schema?
No, it's like I use spec on Python, but mostly for Python itself, its internals. It's not supposed to be something that's like on the user surface area. And if you do use spec, you get some advantage. Like I already have a bunch of specs, so you can piggyback on those specs when you are specking your own things, and it's gonna work nicer. Like you're gonna have better reporting, but you can just ignore the spec side entirely and just use Python for its functionality, and it doesn't try to impose any spec or schema in any way for the users. Okay, and I have a question from Wesley Madsen. So, is there a particular project structure you use to define specs versus using them and the like? I remember running into feelings of near circular dependencies lest I try to spec anything large enough for multiple files. Yeah, thanks for the question. And in this matter, I think there are two types of specs that I like to keep separated when I think about them. And one of them would be like model specs, like in the sense like a domain model specs. So if you are modeling something that's like user facing, user email, user ID, and all these kinds of data, then I see as like domain specs, and those I think are better to live in like their own namespaces. Like you create namespaces dedicated for these kinds of specs. While when I'm doing specs for library development, so for example, in Python itself, I have resolvers, I have paths, I have many internal things and names that I use. And in those cases, I think it makes more sense to the spec live together with the functions, because they are usually there's a collocation between them that works really nicely. So it makes very convenient both to use and to write them. And while the domain ones better separated. That's it. Yeah, very good questions, everyone. Here, as you can see, another cloudy day in Sao Paulo. Uh, Hope you are all having a great time in the conference. Oh man, I was really wishing to be in Canada right now. Hopefully next year we'll have the in-person one.
Hopefully. We'll see how things go. But I think
Yeah,
we got a lot of people out from everywhere this time around, probably because we can all do it from the comfort of our homes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe at some point could be a mixture of both, like the people that can be present, do present. Otherwise, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I think it'd be a good mix. Give people the opportunity if they can.
Yeah. Get some live presentations if people are brave enough.
We could see if yeah, we could just leave this open for a little bit longer. If anyone has any questions, pop them up. But uh, don't feel obliged if you want to head out. No.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine staying. I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
If there are more questions, or here or anytime. Are you guys are on the Clojure stack Slack as well?
I'm sure people know about it. If not, we should post a link. It's
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for anybody that's maybe it's new to the Clojure community, that's the best community channel ever. I really love the Clojurians, and you can find most Clojure people there.
speaking of circular logic in spec. I'm wondering, is there some sort of way that you can do it? Because I recall, and sorry, it's been maybe 2-3 years since I used spec, but I recall trying to do like a circular or like a recursive data structure definition with spec, and it somehow wasn't possible at the time, or it was like very difficult to do. Is that something that you've ever had to deal with? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
By the time you are telling me you use, that was probably a bug, because it does support recursive specs. I just wrote some of those these days, and yeah, for some time it had a bug that was trying to realize then too soon. But usually you can do some circular reference on specs. That's fine.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, you can have something like I have some data structures sometimes that are like, I want to spec that says that must be a map, the key must be a keyword, but the value needs to be the same thing again recursively. And yeah, that's one spec that I just wrote recently that does that.
I think it's a common use case, honestly, in a lot of data structures, at least like complex ones when you start getting outside of the trivial problems we work with.
Yeah. Yeah, really, I'm really hopeful for spec and people start using more namespace keywords, because I feel like namespace keywords for me are really the superpower of Clojure. When you compare for like static type languages, will always have the types that will help you. And I think what people love most about static typing, and it's really fun when I use that too, is because you have suggestions for you, right? You press a dot, and then the IDE can tell you, okay, oh, you have all these options that you can use here. And most dynamic language don't have that, or have that very limited. And I think namespace keywords is one way that we can improve on that, because when you use namespace keywords, if you know the context, the namespace we're talking about, then it's going to get suggestions from that namespace. Also, when you are flowing information across the system, we don't have the types, but if you have the namespaces on the keywords, then you can always know what the context is there is. So it turns into a context-free thing. So I really wish people use more namespace keywords, because that starts enabling a lot of these things. And my library pattern is really about that. It's about leveraging that property. Because once you use that, what pattern allows you to do is to establish relationships between those keywords. One example, it's like one relationship that a lot of systems will have is that you can use a customer ID to fetch a customer name, right? You can establish that relationship. It's very clear on most systems. And Python allows you to write this kind of expressions. You can say this, okay, if the user gives me a customer ID, I can give you a customer name. And by knowing the relationships between your attributes, Python can like, you can send a customer ID and ask, oh, get me the customer name, details, this, and that. And by using this graph, it's going to resolve that. And it's really important that we use namespace keywords because ambiguity would kill the system on its heart.
It's interesting you say that because we're starting to see it a lot in libraries now to indicate where it is that these keys are coming from. And I think you talk about it a little bit in your talk, just to help with like the separation of where it is that a key has come from, so that you don't end up with conflicting keys, so you don't end up with that ambiguity you're talking about. I think I saw recently in the Ring 2 spec that they're going to be, or the specification rather, that they're going to be using namespace keywords for a lot of the things that I think previously were just regular keywords.
Oh, that's great to hear. I was not following Ring 2, but I'm really happy to hear that. Thank you. That's great news.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. And I wonder what pushed it. Did we have namespace keywords before when spec was released?
Yes, namespace keywords been there forever.
Okay.
It's just that people, I guess people just wasn't used. People really don't understand that in the beginning. I think we are, as a community, are starting to build an understanding about that. And it's really like, it's like you do with your code, right? Imagine if we didn't have namespaces for functions. Would be terrible, right? How you could use multiple libraries, and C people have this problem, so they have these really long names for functions. And yeah, and I think it's the same for while the functions are on the behavior side of your software, the keywords are on the information side of your software. And when you give namespace to them, you give the same robustness that you give to your code when you namespace your functions. You give the freedom of communication and the freedom for multiple namespaces to live together, kind of. It's a beautiful word.
It's like it's constantly evolving the way that that we're writing code, and it's always interesting to see how like the paradigms start shifting. We start focusing in on different things that that make our lives easier. But I think you've hit the nail on the head with namespace keywords as a means to help us like decrease ambiguity, help grow larger systems. They're super useful.
Yeah.
And Max didn't have a question in the chat, but he mentioned that it gave him a new perspective on things.
Mm-hmm.
It is a good talk.
Well, thank you, everybody. Yeah. It was a fun creating. The first time I recorded a talk like that, the different experience. You guys will have more and more of that, and yeah.
Yeah, hopefully next year we can see you out again.
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, my plan was going to stay some time in Canada. I was planning to stay a month there. I've been wanting to visit Canada for years now, and this was going to be the situation. But like many plans this year, has to be postponed.
Hopefully not too long.
Yeah. Let's see. First we have to unblock Brazilians for the rest of the world. Right now we're just screwed.
Oh, okay.
There's a new question. Okay,
Yeah.
let me check the last one more question. So maybe another question. What are next awesome projects for CLJS and CLJ community, Wilker? Something in progress together with Rome Research? Okay, interesting that you asked that. I plan, yes, my next project will be about Python 3. I'm gonna make a rewrite of Python. I starting to work on that. But to be very honest, I've been in the last couple of weeks. I was being burned out very heavily, and I actually quit Rome Research. I'm currently not working for any company, and I'm gonna take kind of a sabbatical. And I like to first I'm gonna take things very easy, lightly, so just to set expectations. But I plan to work more on my projects because I have these ideas for Python and other projects around Python, like the idea of providing Python resolvers for common libraries and getting the getting the community to get it more extensible, really more easy to use. And I think I can simplify a lot of things after learning on that. So my expectations is just to work on open source stuff for the next 6 months, and I hope to have a lot of fun doing that because I've been wanting to do that forever, and I finally got myself in a position that I can do that. So I think will be super fun. And thanks for asking. Okay, I think we are getting to the time. We can wrap up now. Does anybody want to do a last question? So
If you want, I just saw there's one in the chat that says, can you elaborate on what you just said, function side of your program versus the information side of your program?
Sure. It's just about data versus functions. Like when I think about the function side, I mean, the behavior when things change, right? If you think of the datomic model that it says like you have the data and you have functions that will move your temporal data each time of the head. So the information is that data is a snapshot of your system or some parts of it, and that's how you represent your information. And the function part of it is the things that convert that operate on that data somehow. So that create that data, modify it, or do it because we already know we know the value of doing that for our functions. I think nobody questions that we should or not use namespace for functions. Everybody agrees, yeah, we should use, but that's not the same. I don't feel the same for keywords and information. I feel like there is still a very big number of people that are still not just using a namespace keywords because they just think about that locally, and I like for people to think of that in a broader sense. That's it. Thanks for the question, John.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wilker. That was yeah, that was really good. If you haven't seen Wilker's talk, I strongly recommend you guys check it out. Take care. And
yeah, thank everybody. Thanks for like having me. Have fun with the next thing. Thanks. Bye. Thank you.